It's really a pleasure today for me to introduce Diana Inkpen. Diana's talk is going to be about estimating depression and suicide ideation levels from social media for the Canadian population. Let me put on my video. So some words about Diana. Diana is a professor at the University of Ottawa in the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. She obtained her PhD from the University of Toronto in computer science, and her MSc and BEng in computer science and electric engineering, respectively, from the Technical University of Cluj-Napoca in Romania. Her research is in natural language processing, where she works on application in that area. Diana has organized many international workshops and has been program co-chair of this conference a few years ago. And she is editor-in-chief of the Computation Intelligence Journal that many of you know, and the associate editor for the Natural Language Engineering Journal. She has published numerous articles in journals and conference over, I counted, over 160 and counting, and a book on the area. And the book is very interesting on natural language processing for social media. So I don't want to take too much time presenting this excellent colleague of ours. Diana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ilujo, for the introduction and for the invitation. It's my pleasure to present at Canadian AI. I did present one time in the past, a very nice conference in Halifax, of course, in person. I think I can share my screen. Yeah, it works, yes. So what I'm going to talk today is about a project that's been on for a couple of years together with my students and collaborators. Just want to thank them for the help. Prasadit and Ruba did a lot of work on this and they graduated. Prasadit is doing a postdoc with me. And we had a few more people, 2 postdocs who are employed now by Safe2Net company, who's been one of my partners. And very important for this talk, Kenton White from Advanced Symbolics company, he provided the population sample, a Canadian population sample for the experiment that I'm going to talk today. And the sample was calibrated to be representative of Canadian population according to census, or the previous census, because the current one was not available at that time. As Ilujo mentioned, my book, Co-authors with ATF Artsindar, has a 3rd edition, 2020. We added more new state-of-the-art deep learning and so on. So I'm just mentioning because there is a chapter on research, on health modeling from social media. And here I'm talking today in particular about depression, suicide, ideation, doing them together, and a little bit about depression questionnaire that looks at how people sleep and eat and what are they doing, how can their depression be estimated automatically to help mental health professionals and ease the waiting, gain time when the waiting times are long and the people need help. I don't know if we can you see the screen properly? The Zoom controls are always in the way when I'm teaching on Zoom also. Are they on the way? Okay, I think they are, but not much I can do. So some of my projects that I mentioned, the Safe2Net company, we look at children behavior to protect them online against aggression, sexting, cyberbullying, substance abuse, and including depression and possible ideas of suicide. These children, so we stop at teenagers, maybe teenagers are included with parental consent in this online child protection app that we developed with Safe2Net company. Of course, we need to know more about the users of social media, their gender, age, location, personality, other things. And today I'm going to focus more on the mental health at user level, but with the goal of getting to population level. There is a lot of work on social media for mental health. And despite issues on privacy and so on, there is a high level of self-disclosure. That's why we keep doing research on this kind of data, because it's available and public as long as we use it carefully with the ethics approval and so on. And of course, there have been surveys done on telephone by Statistics Canada or other. The response rate they're expensive. Response rate is low. Sometimes interviewers need to have some memory bias and issues. Social media is a natural setting where people like to share for their friends, if not for everybody. And there was a lot of work looking at features like first-person pronouns, emotion. People talk about themselves. In this could be different or exacerbated if there is any mental health, possible signs of mental health issues. So as I mentioned, lots of work on detecting post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia, depression, eating disorders, other things. And lots of shared tasks. So we use some data sets from the shared tasks. CL-Psych is a computational linguistics meets clinical psychology, a workshop affiliated to the ACL conferences that's been on from 2015 on. Every year they have a shared task. So if the task is useful for my project, we use the data and participate. At least the data from 2015 and 2019 on suicide detection, I'll show some results on it. And there is a lot of related work. We also participated in, this was interesting, reachout.com forum. There were 4 classes. So you had to classify every post in green, amber, red, or crisis. Well, crisis would be 3 here, so it's 4. And the moderator had to intervene for the last 2 and doesn't have to hurry to respond for the previous, the level 0 or 1, and maybe other people can answer rather than the moderator. And that sped up the response time of the moderator in a real setting. So this was a real application. Even if the results were not that high in terms of precision recall as measure, it reduced the response time for the critical and crisis messages for the moderator. So it was useful in practice. More related work, and one important one is a shared task 2019 on suicide ideation. And the data is public data in a way as tweets and forums, but it's labeled and it's sensitive, so we have to use it with ethics approval and care. So there are many shared tasks, many data sets beside the one from the shared task. One we build ourselves from well stock tweets, and we have a new version in progress because the one we had is 2015 and 16, 15, and it didn't include the French language tweets. And we have a new version in progress, bigger and more bilingual. There is some other data set that we are using from Georgetown University and a few others. This is a BellTalk data set that I mentioned is old and not that big. We had 69 users with depression and 91 control without depression. And it was labeled at user level and at tweet level. Only part of the users were labeled, about 8,000 tweets, because that's how much annotation time we had for the 2 or 3 annotators to see how they agree, and the third one to solve disagreements as needed. But it for us was still interesting to clean this data, to remove the advertising and fundraising, and see what people are sharing as their stories. And here's a cloud, word cloud, and here's some examples. Suffering, couldn't wait for treatment, talking can save your life. So it's very hard data set, especially if you want to label and predict at user level, at post level. If you want to predict at user level, that's somehow easier because you have at least more information, more tweets from that user. Though it's important to figure out which tweets from what period, if the user were depressed and no longer it is, so that you get the right tweets to make a prediction. So as I mentioned, we had this is another data set. The rest of the data sets are from US. So we used a lot of US data to train classifiers, but we end up applying them on Canadian sample, and we try to see how much we lose. Patterns are similar in some ways. Why do we use these data sets from US? Because they are available and they are labeled by experts or crowd annotators. We have to be careful which data sets are more reliable and which are more noisy. I'm fine with using noisy training data as long as we test on something more carefully labeled, so we know that what the testing is, the results on the test data could be trusted, with our limitations, of course. So this is a CLSI depression data set, also had PTSD users. Here's the number of users, so it's bigger. So we aim for our new Bell stock data set to be even bigger than that. But we do have to manually check at least the test data, even if we semi-automatically label the training data in progress. It was not labeled at all at tweet level or message level, only at user level. They tried to have representative age and gender, though maybe they had too many male, because it's 51% maybe should be male or so, depend on what this is US data. So we need to look at US census for that. But still, it was an interesting data set, carefully prepared. We built data sets with Safe2Net, but I'm not going to talk much about that here because it has 7 categories: aggression, violence, substance use. So it has depression and distress. So that's, in that sense, it is useful in that way. And it comes in the Safe2Net app. And we had annotators at the beginning work on it. And there was a lot of labeling going on for English and even for other languages like Spanish and German. The newest data set on suicide detection, these are even more difficult to get than depression data, because it's even more complicated to get suicide ideation data sets labeled by experts or crowdsources. And here there were 4 classes: no risk, low risk, moderate, and severe. And it's very hard to get good results on 4 labels like that. Here's the number of users. How many in train data, how many in test data, almost 1,000 training, 249 tests. So it's user level, this task is user level. And in the end, the evaluation of shared task was flag, not flag, the class A, no risk versus any kind of risk, which is interesting in some way, but maybe more useful is urgent, non-urgent, AB versus CD, moderate and severe risk, when the moderator of the forum needs to make action and reply to these users to help them. So I kind of already mentioned that we could classify messages, tweets, or for the forum messages. And tweets are difficult because they're short. And we do that in the Safe2Net app, but there we don't raise an alarm to the parents unless there's several repeated alarms, like at least three. And it's hard to get good results because one message doesn't tell you that much without having more history context. User level is more useful. And here I can see other applications like having a virtual psychologist, maybe post-monitor patients who finish their therapy and could give access to their therapists to post-monitor them and raise alert about relapses. And what I want to talk more today, it's population level, when we do maybe look at users or directly at messages, but we want to figure out which parts of Canada, which provinces, which age groups are more likely to have mental health or suicide ideation issues, and help, for example, Public Health Agency of Canada to better distribute the spending. And I did work with a few people from Public Health Agency, though they were interested in several projects and they helped a little bit, but then in COVID times, they were too busy with other monitoring than depression and suicide. But of course, this is equally important, even more important during COVID times, because the levels went up. And I was planning to measure this, but we are still collecting data. So just briefly about the Safe2Net application. It's an app. Safe2Net is based in London, UK, and the R&D center is in Ottawa, my former postdocs and a few other students around them. So they kind of acquired the Canadian company and become the R&D center. So as parents and children install this app, parents cannot see the messages. Especially in UK, they had to adhere to GDPR, the data protection, the privacy. So the parents don't see the messages, but they get warning, and the warning try to explain, was it aggressive behavior, sexting, depression, offensive language, what happened? And the warning goes on to the parent only after the child is warned 3 times. Look, this message is, you are having some problem, this message so problem. After 3 times, the parent will be alerted and try to explain. But the parents maybe have some idea if the children are in trouble, but you never know. So the app seems to be useful in some ways. We are looking at multiple languages for this app and to add image and video processing for cyberbullying, video where bullies, pornography, and so on. So back to classifying user messages and users and try to estimate population level, depression and suicide ideation. We use classical, standard methods, state-of-the-art information extraction, retrieval, clustering, classification, use pre-trained models with zero-shot learning when possible. We fine-tune to our task with SVM if we have little data with smart features or linguistic feature, emotion feature, and so on, and with latest state-of-the-art CNN, BERT, and others when we have training data, and we do have the shared task data sets and any other data set that we found useful for training. And then they start with pre-trained word embeddings to include as much as possible knowledge of language. Very much emphasis on multitask learning to get better results, doing several things in the same time, like depression and suicide and other mental health issues when data is available, including domain knowledge. That's difficult. We could still try to look for. So there were two papers with Rubas Caïc, my former PhD student, one on depression, one on suicide, that I'm kind of summarizing some results to give you an idea of where we are with this kind of task. We had the population sample, we call it P1. It was Twitter data, 40,000 users. It was even bigger than that, but we had to clean it. Many posts, and it was provided by the company Advanced Symbolics, ASI 2015. And we can get new data, but why we need it this year? Because we have Statistics Canada depression survey from that year, and it's the latest available. Maybe more coming, but it takes a while for Statistics Canada to post. And we have then depression classifiers and suicide ideation classifiers. And we had data set D1 for training, and it had a part for test, and D2 for additional testing with our retraining, just to see if what we learn is general enough to be reasonable on a different data set. And the same we did with S1, which was a suicide data set from shared task. Smaller, we had training and test data there, and a separate test set just for additional testing, which was provided by SI, but we had to label ourselves. So maybe this picture gives you a bit more an idea what I mean. We have for D1 is depression as suicide detection, and we do have the D1 data set with training part and test part, and of course validation part for deep learning. Then we have S1 data set for training, validation, and a test set. And I will report results on the test sets of this, and even results by cross-validation on this data set. But what I'm interested in then, on a separate held out data set, D2 for depression and S2 for suicide, do we get reasonable results? Because very often, I don't know, for some project, we tried sentiment analysis off the shelf for different kind of data, and doesn't work very well. So out of domain test data is really a problem. And what can you do? Can you train on different kind of stuff if you have training data for other domain? Or what we aim here is try to get more general features and more general knowledge out of the data. So that's why it's very important that we test on these other data sets that are not that. And let's say then we decide on a best classifier for depression and for suicide, and then we'll apply it on population sample. And how can we evaluate on population sample? I will let you know how, but we don't have the expected solution on that. We only have statistics from Statistics Canada surveys. And we had to match the year of those surveys, 2015 or 16 for suicide. So here's what we do for population level. We had the population level sample P1 from the company ISI was raw tweets. Then there was automatic where there was information, demographic information provided, we use it. Otherwise it was predicted. Provinces, Canadian province location, how many male, female, or other age groups. And we had positive and negative data, and we trained classifiers, and then we did predictions at population level by applying those classifiers, just to kind of check how much male, female, for example, we had in the data set. In the sample P1, there were 53% females. And our classifier predicted 47%. So we are close sometimes in the predictions, but not quite exactly. We'll see more results later. Census 2017 was used to calibrate the P1 sample, and how well the sample P1 matches the census data per groups of ages, and then male, female. So this is a number of female and male. So there should be a little bit more male and female, but it was not always the case, and depends on the location also. And here are the census numbers. And this P1 sample was also used by the company for predicting election outcomes. So that's why it was very important for them to calibrate it with census data in Canada. And if some age groups were underrepresented, they gave them higher weights in their sample and so on, especially like, let's say, older people might not be as much on Twitter as younger people. So depression classifiers, here's a word cloud from the data. We use a lot of features, word embeddings, of course, but other emotion features from linguistic wording, inquiry wording context that has specific mental health and emotion features. Some other TF-IDF topics, part of speech text, but mostly important major life event detection, if somebody had a major issue, death in family, divorce, and so on, and other statistical features on the text. And we could try just simply your words, or we can try with these smart features, which are more engineered. So something that works best for us was fast text embeddings, because they have a subword embedding. So if the words are missing, you can still get an embedding based on parts of the words and terminations and so on. And there's just a number of an idea of number of features that were used in some of the experiments. We tried on the D1 data set by cross-validation on a test set, and later on a D2 data set for depression. We tried SVM and logistic regression, and XGBoost is actually a very good classifier. It's a meta classifier. It can, depending on the amount of training data, it could be as good as deep learning. And all features are helping. We are at F1 score of 96% based on this data. On the test set, held out data test set, without retraining, we are at 88%. So we do lose from 96 to 88, but given that we didn't train on this data, it's still good. That means the classifier did learn language and features related to depression rather than, so it's not that it works well only on the D1 test set or cross-validation. So we are happy with this results on D2. Therefore, but more than that, the results are, of course, we are going to go with the deep learning. The CNN classifier with fast text is the best here. Not 80, 96, but only 83 on this data. You can get maybe better, but on D2, it's 89% without retraining on the new test set. So we could have got with XGBoost with smart features or CNN with fast test embeddings in terms of both being good on both data sets. So we decided to apply on population level this, or maybe we apply the two just in case. But the idea is that the CNN classifier with fast text was one of the best here and fast enough for our data sets. So let's say we run it now we choose one best classifier or two, and we run it on population sample P1. How can we evaluate? We got the Canadian Community Health Survey 2015-16 from Statistics Canada that estimated that 7.1% of Canadian population was depressed in 2015 when the survey was done over the phone, and the automatic filling of this PHQ-9 questionnaire was what made the decision if the user is depressed or not. Our sample is much smaller, is not, smaller. The statistics, no, sorry. So the Statistics Canada sample is probably similar in size with our sample, 25,000 users, because they cannot call more than that many people on the phone. And our best model estimated 10% of the sample P1 dataset is depression, which is not quite that far from 7% that Statistics Canada estimated. The advantage is that we can run our data sets now on new social media data, make some predictions, maybe it's more than 10%. We cannot really know until we have a new survey from Statistics Canada, maybe coming up in the next few years. Or even if they did it, it's not available yet. And more than just saying how much percent is of the Canadian population has depression, we wanted to know how many male, female, how many age groups and so on. And are we correct more for male than for female and so on. So here is P means prediction, D means depression for male, depression for female, prediction for male, prediction for female. So maybe here is 7.8 for Newfoundland for male, our prediction 7.4. For females, 13, our prediction 12.8. And of course, there is some variation here, and maybe it's easier seen in the in this graph rather than in the table. Here is per provinces, male and female together. Here is correlation for female for all provinces, male for all provinces. So correlations of 0.9 are very good. Here's per age group. For some age group, the correlation was a little bit lower, but still is 0.9 something in general. So we are happy with population level predictions. They are not perfect, but we think they are reasonable according to this one way of evaluating, the only one we could find. Here is male versus female for Canadian provinces and territories. I should specify that we had to remove some provinces and territories, especially a few territories where we have too little data in our data sample, and even Statistics Canada had not much for Yukon, I think. And we didn't include Quebec because we didn't treat the French language messages. We will in the next future work. So here is census data, here the Statistics Canada questionnaire. And then we also, so there is a bit of difference. Maybe they overestimate female and underestimate male and so on, and the same for the Statistics Canada survey and the same for our sample P1. So the same procedure we applied for suicide detection. I have no idea on the time, but okay. I'm half done. Let me restart the slideshow. Oh, I meant from the slide where I was not from the beginning. Okay, so I was talking about depression level for Canadian population, and now I want to talk about suicide detection at Canadian population level. In a way, similar procedure, just different training data and slightly different features depending on how we manage to get the best results. Linguistic engineering features or just word embedding features or combined. The same classifier SVM XGBoost being very good, 92%, SVM 89. I'm looking at F1 measure because accuracy is not that good because we have imbalanced data sets. Of course, we can balance training data, but the test data will be imbalanced. Here is on the training data S1 from shared task. Fast text with CNN and maybe adding linguistic features, or a few of them got very good results, like 91% F-score. Even BERT for sequence classification with newer version got good results. But just for consistency for both data sets on population level, we stick with CNN classifier with fast text, which was fast and got good results. And this is on the cross-validation on the similar, so therefore in the same kind of test data. And here's on new data, S2, which we didn't train for. So the CNN with fast text got 93% F-score. So I think this showed that classifier did learn something useful since it works on a new test set. The test set happened to be Canadian population, but it's very small though, and we label it manually. So now we are happy with our classifiers, and we need another survey from Statistics Canada. Well, the same one, the same survey. It had suicide ideation prediction. And what the survey predicted for that year, 9.5 Canadian percent of Canadian population had suicide ideation ideas. I'm not talking about what happened, if a few cases that are very unfortunate and which were big problems in many places, including the University of Ottawa campus in recent years. So what our classifiers predicted for this P1 sample, 10%, 10.6%. So not too far. XGBoost was very good classifier, but prediction was lower on the P1 sample, just out of curiosity. Correlation 0.6, a bit lower than for depression, which for depression we had 0.9 correlation. And how do we do per location, per provinces, territories? For example, here, the red one is CNN prediction, and the blue one is the Statistics Canada survey, which of course, it's also an estimation, but calibrated to be representative of Canadian population using census data from 2016. So we are off for some provinces, but we are on doing well. And maybe, maybe there were some issues on Nova Scotia and events on Cape Breton on some point in time, based on sort of a cluster of suicide thoughts in that area. Again, how do we do for female versus male? Blue was predicted and red is the survey. So for some provinces we are off, and for some, but averages hide these issues for which provinces we are on or off. Sorry if this graph has some issues. So I will stop here with the idea of prediction level population on our P1 sample of Canadian population. And I just want to cover two more topics for more things that we are doing related to this. Like this idea of multitask deep learning for multiple mental health detection, different mental health issues, including suicide, including depression. And how do you add suicide ideation to that to see if what we learn from one disease can help predict better for other disease? With my PhD student Prasadit Budrita, who's now doing postdoc because he graduated. So this was interesting for us just to see if we feed in suicide ideation versus mental health data. And it was not exactly the same users, but we aligned the best we could to have the same kind of characteristics. And then we ran through two different classifiers or combine them and do multitask learning in some ways. And we use a multi-channel CNN, again, based on fast text. We tried many things, but this is something that we thought it's working well. And then we predict at the same time suicide ideation and mental health. The Zoom bar is disturbing me again. Okay, so we had this kind of multi-channel CNN with multitask learning with hard parameter sharing and soft parameter sharing. And at some point we tried things that were tried in multitask learning and try to innovate a little bit to get better results on the idea of this shared parameter, soft versus hard. So here we did build the architecture in maybe slightly better ways than related work. And then we can predict suicide ideation or mental health, depression, or even others, because we had the data sets that had multiple disorders. And just briefly a little bit, so we are still at 85, 86, close to 90% prediction in F-score. And if we predict diseases separate or suicide ideation separate versus mental health separate, we do get an improvement when we run the multitask learning. And we tried suicide plus depression to see if there is an influence. What we noticed actually here that PTSD was post-traumatic stress disorder was something that led people to more suicide ideation. And that was seen in US war veterans and also in Canadian war veterans. I think PTSD was one. Depression maybe doesn't necessarily lead to suicide, but PTSD to increase the risk of suicide. So our classifiers were able to detect better if they were able to detect both ideas, and together the results were for me more reliable. So I won't talk too much about this, but since there was a shared task on suicide detection, our results were quite good, 86, 87% on the two tasks, urgent versus not urgent forum messages, or flagged versus not flagged, like some level of suicide, zero level versus some level even in low. And there were other people who participated and got similar results or a bit lower. There was one from Center of Mental Health, Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto participation who got very high score in some place here. They didn't include a paper in the proceedings, so we couldn't see what they used. Oh, well, only just from the overview paper of the shared task, we know that they use a CNN classifier plus features. So this was what I wanted to talk about suicide depression. And in the remaining time, I just want to make sure I have enough time for the questions. But I want to cover one more topic related to the depression, because till now I talk about classifiers. Is this user depressed or not? Mostly at user level, with focus on population level after that. But this is not enough to just, we need to understand, of course, why is this prediction this way. And there was one shared task at IRIS 2021 that caught my attention because it was automatically filling back depression inventory questionnaire, similar with PHQ-9. And there was data available, people, actual social media users who fill in the questionnaire. There were 90 users for training and 80 for test. And this user fill in this questionnaire, BDI, and answered to 21 questions about how they feel. Are they feeling sad? Are they pessimist? Do they lose their energy? Are they sleeping well? Are they eating well? And the task was to answer questions, not to classify as depression or not. But with the answering questions, then they fill in the questionnaire manually and automatically. We use the social media data to automatically fill in the questionnaire. Then we have actually evaluation possibility with the manually filled questionnaire to see are the answers correct if they are detected automatically. And after that, can we predict the level of the depression automatically, even if it's small scale? So it's initial work. Though the task was on for 3 years, the results are a little bit better than baseline, but it's a very difficult task. It's a question answering task. If I can show some example of questions. Question 5. About sadness. I do not feel sad. I feel sad much of the time. I'm sad all the time. I'm so sad or unhappy that I can't stand it. And the shared task participants had to classify, had to answer, is the answer to Q5, 0, 1, 2, and 3. All participants trained 21 classifiers for 21 questions, and there were 4 classes. There were 2 questions that had, instead of 4 classes, 6 classes. So for example, to A and B, I sleep a lot more than usual. I sleep a lot less than usual. So this was a very difficult question with the sleep and eating with 7 answers instead of 4, because it was hard for the classifiers to understand if there is more or less sleep. But for depression, you get the same points, the number of points. So in the end, you didn't have to, you could answer to A or B, but if you answer 2, you get the right level of depression after that. So this shared task was interesting because you could frame it as question answering or as classification with for 21 classifiers with 4 answers each. Well, 19 classifiers had 4 answers and 2 had 7 answers. And we pre-processed the data, of course. And then we tried a lot of, we tried some topic modeling to see if we can get what messages are about sleep, which messages are about eating, which messages are about activity, physical activity, and so on, using Top2Vec topic model deep learning based software developed by my PhD student Dimo Angelov. We tried to keep only the posts relevant to each question, but it was very, very difficult. Sometimes the posts were not there. People don't talk about how they sleep, but when they fill the questionnaire, they would answer. But in their social media data, they don't. So it's impossible to answer in that case. Or maybe they were post about that and our filters missed it. We tried the zero-shot learning without training on the 90 users because it's not that much training data. But we maybe tune the similarity threshold, when to say, how to decide. Like, for example, the post was this, I'm so sad, I cry every time. And we need to answer, is it 0, 1, or 2, or 3? And here's the similarity scores, 0, 9, 0, 8, 0, 93, and so on. And we had to find some thresholds to figure out, should we choose answer 2 in this case? And we also tried BERT QA architectures with multiple choice answers, with these 4 answers and so on. So we tried 3 kind of architectures, but the focus was on filtering out which posts are relevant to each answer, to this question in order to be able to answer it, but at least to have some information there that we couldn't evaluate if filters are correct, only if the filters help to solve the task in the end. So yeah, here's a question answering architecture, and we tried hierarchical attention networks and so on. I had 3 students helping and tried different kinds of architectures. Hit rate was important. Do we answer correctly? So this was important evaluation measures. Do we answer correctly? Did we get the right answer to each of the 29 questions? And then they also look if we had the right level of depression based on the answers. So if you answer 0, 1, 2, or 3, then you add up the scores for 21 questions. If it was 0 and 9, the score, there is minimal depression, no depression. If it was 10, 18, it's mild, then moderate, and severe depression from 30 to 63 points. So they use this depression level as an evaluation measure, but in my opinion, if you didn't answer correctly and you by chance get the right level of depression, that doesn't help in future work. So the results report 4 evaluation measures, but the first one is important. Did we answer the questions correctly or not? And it's a bit not that exciting because our best run was 32% accurate on answering questions. And the best score was 41% on our best run ranked 5 in the third task, and the best score was 41% for answering correctly. So that didn't lead to very good depression detection. Nonetheless, I still like this shared task data because it's important to detect what are the symptoms, why do people might be depressed? What are their symptoms? They don't sleep well, they don't eat well, how the depression manifests, because that's the way psychologists also diagnose. Is a patient is showing some of the symptoms for 3 weeks or other period like that, then they get a diagnosis of clinical depression. And if we look at the shared task data, some questions were easy to answer, like suicide thoughts, or I don't know which one, feeling guilt or pessimist or sadness. And some are very, very difficult, like sleeping pattern, 12%, appetite, 12%. This is also due because of the fact that these questions had 7 answers instead of 4. And the training data was little and not many posts were about each of the topics and so on. Nonetheless, I found this task more challenging, more interesting. So I already showed some results, but they are a little bit above the baseline, but more work is needed for all teams that participated to get good results in this difficult task. So I will stop here with my tasks and try to conclude and highlight the limitations to leave enough time for questions and discussion. As always, when we work with social media data, there is limitations on availability, correctness, how much you can trust, how much disclosure it is, how much is representative of general population. Though in this work particularly, which we had this sample of Canadian population that was calibrated to be representative based on census data, and then we look at Canadian survey from Statistics Canada on mental health and suicide, and their sample was also calibrated to be representative, and we look at how our predictions correlate with their predictions. And we got distant correlations. So of course, more work is needed for some provinces where we lack data and so on and so on. We don't have clinical data at all in this kind of work, which would be nice to have clinical data. Is this really depression according to a clinician? Because Statistics Canada used a PHQ-9 questionnaire, so it was it was automatically detected if the person had depression according to that, though people and clinicians think this is a reliable one. And the Beck Depression Index questionnaire also is considered a reliable questionnaire. But it would be nice to have clinical data, and I've seen very little work on that, maybe some for schizophrenia and other more advanced mental health issues, but not for depression and suicide. We identify risk factors as much as we could on the features and on the events and so on, but more work on this is definitely needed. There is evolution of time. Do we know that somebody has depression now and not later? Which period of time should we use? There was a shared task this year at CL Psych workshop on the mood detection in time. Are there peaks or changes in time? it was in mood, not necessarily depression and or suicide. It was interesting data, and we did participate in it. It was very hard to get access to the data, and even if we managed in the end to participate, all teams got mixed results. A difficult task again. And nonetheless, we have last but not least, we should be careful with ethics considerations. We only did a secondary use of data. So we use these data sets from social media to predict and to learn and to do research. We had ethics approval from the University of Ottawa for secondary use of data, and for some of the shared tasks data, we had to have special approval and send it to the organizers. But all of it was secondary use of data because it's social media, Twitter, or forum messages, labeled though. It's public data in some way, but it was not necessarily intended for research unless that's the agreement of the platform, and it had labels that were sensitive. Interesting, the university wouldn't grant ethics permission if you ever want to monitor users' life, but we never do that. We always have training test data and even other test data set aside, but it's not live data. We had to securely store the data, anonymize the data. After the shared task from this year on detection of mood changes in time, we had to delete the data after the shared task, which is what we signed up for. We never contact users. We have the user IDs, but we don't know much about the users, and we don't try to find out more. And I presented some application scenarios on the Safe2Net app, but this is a consent between children and the parents, or they had experiments with school counselors keeping an eye on children. But other applications need careful ethics and testing and so on and so on. So in conclusion, we had a good performance for user level detection for depression and suicide. In particular, population level predictions are possible, and we try to evaluate how good are we, how far we are from usability. Multitask deep learning helped in our experiments. In future work, we would like to have more application scenarios. We have work in progress for multilingual multimedia depression or other kind of mental health issue detection, and more plans for automatic filling of BDI questionnaire based on that data, because we wouldn't be able to get more data on that. So I don't know, some references, the book, a chapter of the book, and papers on like stock data, on our multitask learning, then Ruba's work on Canadian population, depression, and so on, and more of the older projects. And I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, but I'll stop here, and hopefully there is, oh, maybe it's just right on time. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions and in English or French if somebody wants.
All right, I'll go first for questions. First of all, Diana, thank you for this very interesting talk. It was fascinating. It's state-of-the-art results on a very socially important, impactful problem. My question relates to out-of-domain results. You showed us some results. Some of your experiments were on unseen test data, but when it comes to social media documents, messages by users, in my research, I found that there is a lot of variability from one platform to another, from one community to another. They have often completely different jargon and expressions and conventions, and that hinders a lot cross-domain application. A system trained in one community tested on another one, at least when it comes to my research on hate speech and cyberbullying. I was wondering if you observed something similar in your research.
So the two platforms we had was Twitter and forum data from Reddit. And we managed to get good results from cross-platform transfer using these pre-trained knowledge models in fast text or BERT knowledge where you have enough knowledge of English. The domain is similar. We talk about depression, we talk about suicide, ideation. It's just a platform was different and the results was decent with some loss of accuracy. But we would still like, we could also train on joint data if we have, and then hopefully we catch a little bit more generality that's across platform. Because Twitter messages, they have their own hashtags and so on, issues there, but yeah. That's it's still reasonable, but maybe training on both to kind of learn joint platform issues, close platform issues. So I guess we filter out the tags and everything like that, and even yeah.
All right, thank you.
So Leila, you can go on. Ilu just told me he had an internet issue, so I'm taking over for questions. So Leila, go on for your question.
Hi, Diana. Always a pleasure. I have a question regarding the filling of the BDI questionnaires. Now, it seemed to me that some of the questions you mentioned yourself, some of them have a multitude of possible answers, but they really don't seem like distinct buckets to me. For example, if you use QA, there's an expectation that the answers will be different. In this case, yeah, here you have 3, but four, but sometimes you even have more than 4.
Example, this one.
Yeah, and it really looked like a regression task to me. Is it, did people use regression or?
So all had 4 answers. The 2 who had 7 answers, like was one, it was still 4, but 1 had AB, 2 had AB, 3 had AB, only 2 questions had that. And that caused more trouble because I sleep more or less, but a lot was important, a lot more or less, but it confused the classifier. We didn't try regression, we tried question answering, like giving question answer, question answer, BERT QA. But we tried this scores, similarity scores that are a little bit kind of a regression because here we didn't learn anything, we just compute similarity. And then we try to decide.
Well, a related question, those who gave you the data set, did they do what?
They're from ERISC, from European class.
Yeah, I mean, ERISC, I think it's isn't it University of somewhere in the States that they have?
No, this one is European CLE, cross-language information.
Okay, anyways, whoever created the data set, did they do intra annotator agreement? For example, if you ask the same person on 2 different days, heck, on half an hour apart, the same question, and they forgot what they answered half an hour before, they probably might not even give you the same answer twice, right? Some of them, they're like, it's a continuum, and
it's a memory issue. So it was each user, the users answered themselves. Now, if the same user would answer different tomorrow,
that's it.
I don't know if they did a little sanity checking with some users, but not for all the data for sure. Maybe they did for a few users. And these were actually, I don't know, Facebook posts, but it was done with their consent. That's why they have such a low number of users, 290 plus 80, 170.
I'm just saying some of these questions look particularly unfair and seems like a lost cause to me. I mean, they're a continuum, and
it's a difficult task, so we want to work more on it. But it's hard to answer them, and then it's hard to be sure that the information is in their social media posts, because here is what people answered. So maybe they didn't talk about their sleep in their social media.
But I think the evaluation itself is a bit arbitrary. It's a bit like when you use blur in machine translation, you have one gold standard, and if you don't have that one and the answer that is expected, any other answer would be wrong. In this case, I'd say if you're smack on the 2A good for you, but if you have a 2B or 1A, you get partial points or something like that. You have to be.
They had evaluation measures that give partial
okay,
points. Yes,
okay,
yes.
okay.
I just don't like them that much because then by chance you get the right level of depression.
No, but I mean,
by being wrong in the answers. But they had the scores.
Plus or minus 1, not plus or minus the whole.
They had the scores that were more numeric to not penalize if you choose 0 and the answer is 3, to penalize more if you choose 0 and the answer is 3. So this kind of numeric scores. Yeah,
Okay.
They had that. Yeah. They had 4 evaluation measures. The exact answer versus more giving points for partial, close answers. And then do you evaluate the right depression level? It's just that these questionnaires people could fill them once a week, or I don't know, people in remote areas or in space could fill this questionnaire, but it's a hassle for them to fill it. And they don't have a mental health expert, but the questionnaire can tell them, maybe you should get more sleep, you seem a bit depressed. But if we can detect from their social media posts, then they don't have to fill it. So that would be the advantage. And we don't have clinical data, so these questionnaires are somehow reliable in the medical world. So it's nice to have them. And it's not easy to ask users to give you this answer to this questionnaire. So this e-risk people did that for less than 200 users in 3 editions of the shared task, because every year they add the last year's test data to the training data. So they had 90 users now, but in the previous edition, they had less. So nonetheless, I think it's an interesting task, but difficult one. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Diana, I am sorry my internet went out here. Luckily, Sebastian took over there. So any more questions? Well, I have a question, Diana. There is, towards the end of the talk, you said, well, there's no live monitoring of social media users. Why is that excluded? This is a very useful thing to do. That would prevent things like what we saw in Buffalo 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, the University Research Ethics Board would not allow it, and even if we are not qualified to intervene. So if somebody can monitor it, it has to be somebody with authority to intervene, not university researchers. I don't know who, public health agencies, medical experts, crisis lines, but the crisis line is not like that. People call in, they don't monitor people. So that's why the university doesn't, get approval. Your project doesn't get ethics approval if you have idea of monitoring anybody. Yeah, but the idea is somebody should monitor, but the relevant authorities. I'm sure police monitors, terrorists, people who suspected a terrorist intention. I suppose police will monitor their social media accounts because
that's exactly my question.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they have to have the right balance of authority and power to intervene and to not affect privacy of people who, regular people.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Good question, yeah.
Well, I find the research really timely with the incredible pandemic that we have had. It's unfortunate that you could not include data related to the pandemic. I mean, that factor, which is a very big factor in things like depression, that you could not include it.
We are still collecting data now with a master student. And I had a project proposal on that, didn't get funding, but I'm going ahead anyway with the master student, but she's not ready with the data collection and pre-processing. So we hope for a paper for next Canadian AI.
Yeah, that's a really timely research. Yeah. Any more questions? We are 1 minute from the time. Okay. Diana, thank you very much for this very timely research and the very nice talk of a great.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Share.
And let's give a round of applause to you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we heading into the break now. The town is there for anyone who wants to meet some of the people in the conference. And I wish all of you a good lunch and see you in 1 hour. Thanks a lot. Bye, Diana.
Thank you. Bye.